Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 11th of August 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Well, the weather at the moment is a bit iffy. It's cloudy here in Plymouth. It's apparently changeable in London and cooling off in Rhyl. So not too good across the country. And I believe that we're in for a little bit of a chilly spell before it gets warmer. Do we believe any of that? Who knows? Well, do we believe anything that's going on in UK at the moment? I'm going to work through some of the topics that we've picked up from other news sources. We're going to have a look at what those mean. We're going to put some interpretation in. But the key message, of course, from the British government is relax, everything is okay. So let's have a look at the news today in those terms. We're relaxed, everything is okay, there's nothing to worry about. So bring in communist China to get involved in our nuclear power plants. Now, we've spoken on this several times over the last few days, and we're not going to leave the subject alone because everything is okay. We have the communist Chinese government getting involved, 33% to be precise, in the Hinkley Point nuclear power plant scheme. But oh dear, there's trouble. Now, initially it appeared that Prime Minister Theresa May had decided that this needed looking into. There was some blame put on the Chancellor. He hadn't done his job properly, but she was going to have a look at it. It now transpires something rather different was going on, and that is that the US were already looking at the Chinese nuclear industry because there was a conspiracy to develop nuclear material in China without the appropriate US nuclear approval. This was one of the key suspects, Alan Ho, and apparently at the direction of a Chinese state-owned nuclear power company, allegedly approached and enlisted US-based nuclear experts to provide integral assistance in developing and producing special nuclear material in China. Well, the company was the Chinese Nuclear Power Company, of course owned by the Chinese government, and as I've already said, it secured a 33% share in UK's Hinkley Point nuclear plant project. So apparently, everything being okay in UK, nobody realised that the Chinese government would use the foot in the door technique to not only get involved in Britain's nuclear infrastructure, but nobody had any idea that those nasty Chinese might also try and pick up nuclear information. So despite the Home Office, Special Branch, MI5, MI6 and GCHQ, nobody knew that there was a risk. And it's apparently taken the Americans to decide that perhaps Communist China might not be friendly if you give it access to your nuclear information and technology. So we'll leave people to think about that. So the first lesson from this article is that everything is okay. Where do we go? Well, let's have a look at this. This is The Guardian, and The Guardian is pointing out that Theresa May's had to be very careful in her dealings with Northern Ireland with regard to Brexit. And we've labelled that all quiet on the Brexit front because, of course, nobody has any idea if Theresa May is progressing Brexit or not. But what's the key issue? There's concerns for Northern Ireland, but little progress on that mechanism for out. And the Northern Irish contingent is saying it's critical to their economy, Northern Ireland economy, that our business, both indigenous and foreign direct investment companies, retain their competitiveness and do not incur additional costs. They go on to state, we need therefore to retain as far as possible the ease with which we currently trade with EU member states, and also, more importantly, retain access to labour. I think that means keep the door open for immigration. But this is the key point. They also say that since 1994, Northern Ireland has benefited from £11 billion of EU funding and is hoping to draw on a further £3 billion by 2020. So we can say here that everything is okay as long as the Northern Irish people can beg from the European Union. And of course, they're begging to take money which has largely been put in by Britain in the first place. So here we see the hidden power of the European Union at work. What is really driving it is who controlled the purse strings when money was being put into not only so-called regional governments, but also local governments. And no better example than that to talk about what has happened in Cornwall, which of course has swallowed up hundreds of millions of pounds of EU grant money to the extent that they're also desperate. Now it looks as though there might be a cut with Europe, but everything's okay. Well, really, we need the BBC to help us sort out this particular problem. So here we go. And the BBC is crowing that it's going to cost the Ministry of Defence an extra 700 million due to Brexit. Well, it's not the BBC that's commenting. They're simply advertising the Royal United Services Institute, which says that this cost is due to the fall in sterling, where military equipment purchases have been made in US dollars. Well, no great magic there, but a Professor Trevor Taylor from the RUSI think tank told BBC Radio 4 The World at One that the extra cost could lead to a budget black hole, presenting a serious problem for the UK's defence stance. And the BBC went on to label this suggestion the perfect storm. They didn't actually do any investigation of this type of comment, where a Major Tim Cross, retired British Army officer who supported Leave, said, well, defence spending is struggling, but he said we should be dealing with the Brexit situation rather than, quote, running around like headless chickens. So no BBC analysis of the real facts and the problem. And of course, a key part of the problem is that we are continually buying defence equipment overseas, whereas if we had invested in our own military infrastructure, rightly or wrongly, what that is used for, we would be creating jobs and we wouldn't be suffering from an exchange rate problem. But this was too much for the BBC. They simply couldn't spare a journalist to dig deeper. So if we can just pop that one back on screen. We're going to label this "Everything is okay" in the BBC propaganda machine. Now, it takes Russia Today to actually really start to hit home what's happening. And what they picked up on was the fact that American journalists had been pushing the State Department extremely hard to get questions answered about emails from the lovely Hillary Clinton. But despite very measured, well-placed, reasonable questions, the lady in the State Department, sent her on screen, simply said, I can't answer questions on Hillary Clinton's emails. I can't answer questions on Hillary Clinton's emails. And her repetitiveness leads us to believe that everything is okay, but the State Department can't comment on Clinton's emails. This got so bad that this particular journalist became frustrated, and this is what he said: am I not speaking English? Because no matter how he tried to put his question, back came the single statement from that particular lady that the State Department cannot comment on Clinton's emails. So although we've had American top secret information, a clear breach of US security by the Clintons, it appears that nothing she does means that matters are examined and she is ultimately brought before the law. Well, this, of course, is exactly the same process that is going on in UK, where the government and civil servants and public departments simply refuse to answer reasonable questions in order to determine the truth. Well, it comes to Russia Today again to actually take a good close look at the BBC. And one of the things that they've highlighted is this very interesting fact that the BBC relies on the governing Conservative Party for almost 3/4 of the information it cites from politicians according to a report by the broadcaster's governing body. Well, that's quite a statement, so we can relax. Everything is okay with the BBC propaganda machine. So what is Russia Today talking about here? Well, let's have a little look, because the governing body is the BBC Trust, and they've recently put out, 10th of August 2016, that a review has been conducted of impartiality. The BBC, known for its impartiality, has decided to have a good close look at itself. And we're going to say they're accurate, they're unbiased, they're impartial, but they just can't report what people are really thinking and saying. They certainly can't report properly on immigration. They certainly can't report on Westminster corruption, child abuse, or the reality of UK's foreign wars and violence. But don't worry, because apparently everything is okay. Now, we decided to actually have a look into this report so that we were dealing factually. And this is one segment. You can find this if you go to BBC Trust. You can actually have a look at the documents yourself. We encourage people to do that. Don't accept what we're saying. Go and have a look at what the BBC is claiming, at least. And this is a very interesting part of the process, because this is a document in relation to a team that they engaged in Cardiff University. So if we can pop that up on screen a bit, it's regarding supporting recommendations, impartiality review of statistics. And it's addressed to a lady called Jill Matheson. We'll have a look at her in a minute. And the impartiality review panel. We're writing this letter as supporting evidence along with our report, Impartiality Review of BBC Reporting of Statistics, a content analysis. Based on our review of coverage, we identified some areas that the BBC Trust's Impartiality Review panel might consider when making judgments about the BBC's use of statistics and how output might be strengthened. And so the opening letter goes on. We'll leave you to read that, but we were rather intrigued when we got down to the bottom, because the yours sincerely included us, Dr. Stephen Cushion, a Professor Justin Lewis, a Professor Richard Sambrook, and a Rob Callahan. Well, why are we interested there? Because we thought, well, the BBC is investigating itself, so it probably needed to bring in an independent, possibly BBC team. Here's the main lady, and she has got a very good statistical background, because she's worked for the government for about 30 years, has now retired from that government statistical post, but in her comments to the Civil Service World magazine, we were interested to see this. She said about the government statistics department, we have some great friends in the media and elsewhere who act as critical friends, giving feedback on our releases. And we just wondered whether perhaps any of those friends included anybody in the BBC. But apparently everything is okay with the media in UK at the moment, and the public is quite entitled to trust the BBC. Well, the name we spotted on the bottom of that report was no less than this gentleman, and here he is. This is Mr. Richard Sambrook, Professor of Journalism and Director of the Centre for Journalism, Cardiff University, which undertakes postgraduate vocational training, and he is a former Director of Global News at the BBC, where he worked as a journalist for 30 years as a producer, editor and manager. So we take from that that was, of course, a totally detached and independent report, helping the BBC to ascertain that, of course, it is completely unbiased and accurate in its use of statistics or reporting. Does it get better? Well, of course it does. So let's have a look at another gentleman involved with the report, and here he is, Mr. Cushion. And he's the author behind this tremendous article. Well, it's a booklet, really. The Democratic Value of News. Why Public Service Media Matters. And we would say that, of course, the BBC would be considered by most people as a public service media provider. So here's the gentleman. He's a senior lecturer and director of MA Political Communication at Cardiff University School of Journalism, and he's involved with media and cultural studies. And we were very interested in this comment, just how important are public service media to democratic culture? Well, Stephen Cushion puts forward the convincing argument that for all the commercial choice and competition in contemporary news culture, public service media do not only remain distinctive from market-driven media, they contribute to raising the editorial standards of journalism more widely as well. So one of the key men used by the BBC was, of course, a big supporter of BBC type public service journalism. And he thinks from the outset that organisations, presumably like the BBC, are just brilliant at raising journalistic standards. So I've got to put the title back on that slide, and let's just have a look at that, because we can all relax, everything is okay, and the BBC propaganda machine is having a really good look at itself to its entire satisfaction. So what did they look at? Well, here we've got it, and essentially they were looking at duly accurate and impartial content. So the review sought to answer the following questions: to assess whether BBC UK Public Service's news and current affairs achieves due impartiality and accuracy on controversial subjects when it includes statistical analysis; to establish whether the BBC provides duly accurate and impartial reporting of statistics in its UK public service news. And so it goes on, but everything is okay. Well, if we get in a little deeper, we can see that this work has been prepared by a consulting organisation, Oxygen Brand Consulting, and this document is available on the BBC Trust website. But we thought we'd be interested, or our viewers and listeners would be interested, to have a look at the executive summary. It says, we summarise the audience research component of BBC Trust's review, which was designed to assess whether the audience perceive the BBC use of statistics supports impartial reporting, and as far as the audience can judge, whether the use of numbers in reports is accurate. So we just noticed here that there's something very key being stated. There is an assumption by the audience that figures quoted by the BBC will be accurate. And it goes on to say the study produced a consensus that the BBC is perceived to be accurate. But it's taken Russia Today to drill a hole in this nonsense, because, of course, we now know that much of the statistics that's being used as far as the government is concerned is simply pumped straight out from the Conservative Party. But this has taken an in-depth analysis to establish. But don't worry, everything is okay, and the BBC is impartial. Well, this is part of the comment that was listed in the report. And we found this particularly interesting because Engaged Group, Manchester, said not having an agenda when telling a story, what they think is important is finding out the facts and sharing them without bias, covering all angles, aspects and sides of a story to try to tell the whole truth. And down at the bottom, there's some description of what's actually meant. Accurate meant biased on the facts, factual, true, truthful. So the point here is that the audiences knew perfectly well what they were after. They were not after propaganda. They were actually after the BBC to be factual, unbiased, and to be conducting investigative journalism in order to get to the real truth about what was going on. So what has the BBC Trust also been up to? Let's have a look at this. Going back a few years, this is back to 2010 is when this actually goes back to, although it was updated last year. So we've got the BBC Trust saying that BBC Network News has been giving coverage of the 4 UK nations. And did they really deal with aspects of devolution properly? We say that this is really propaganda. It's been done very, very subtly. But of course, here is the BBC now talking about the United Kingdom. Well, it's not really a United Kingdom, it's 4 nations. And this is going back in 2010. What was the agenda here? We would say the agenda was a very creeping propaganda to get people used to the idea that we were going to see the breakup of UK. Did the BBC already know that? Well, I think that many people would say, of course they did. Well, are there other examples of the BBC at work? Let's enter with Russia. And this was pointed out to us by several people, but BBC News crowing over the fact that apparently we now have Polish preppers, it would appear, living in the woods. And what are they doing? They're preparing for war, according to the BBC. It says some 100,000 people have now joined paramilitary organizations in Poland. Others, so-called preppers, are learning how to survive a possible invasion. We've put the word Russian in there because that's what they're talking about. So there's no backing statistics or analytical statistics for the 100,000 people, none at all. But according to the BBC, 100,000 people in Poland are terrified of the Russians. The Polish government hopes these pro-defense groups will form the backbone of a new reserve force to help the professional army. So this BBC article could have been written directly by the Polish ministry, and we say what's going on here is, well, don't worry, everything is okay, but we've just got a BBC propaganda machine running. And they reinforced the story with this one. Poland plans paramilitary force of 35,000 to counter Russia. So I don't know whether this is in addition to the 100,000 preppers or 35,000 is a component of the preppers. But what does the BBC do? Well, the biased article starts with the anti-Russian lines. The territorial defence force is aimed at countering hybrid warfare of the kind that led parts of Ukraine to break away and pledge loyalty to Russia. So those nasty Russians are up front. Russia's annexation of the of the Ukrainian Crimea Peninsula in March 2014 and the insurgency by pro-Russian rebels in eastern Ukraine sent a chill through NATO members who used to be in the Soviet bloc. Russia has also deployed Iskander-M nuclear-capable missiles to Kaliningrad, a territory sandwiched between Poland and the Baltic states. And on it goes. The Baltic region has experienced heightened military tension in recent months, with NATO complaining of aggressive behaviour by Russian Air Force jets. There is no impartial BBC analysis of the Russian position, none at all. There are no proper interviews with Russian politicians, but everything is okay, despite the fact that 3.65 billion of public money in the UK is being used in the BBC propaganda machine. Is there any hope? Well, let's just remind ourselves that yesterday we flagged up this 88-year-old gentleman, and despite being 88, despite living much of his life in a very rural setting and the work on farms, he was able to work out that even if there was trouble with the weather, then we should blame those nasty Russians. So everything is revealed in the BBC propaganda machine, but for me it's taken an 88-year-old man to see through this propaganda, to expose it, and ultimately to laugh at it for what it is. So if you're watching this thinking, I know the BBC's rotten, it's up to us, of course, to do something about it. It's not enough to sit back and say everything's okay. If we have a look at media machines, we thought it might be interesting to see how the government is actually using its media personnel to lie, fob off and obfuscate any inquiries from the public. And we thought we'd just bring in here our Met Police whistleblower, which led to some interesting dialogues yesterday with the Home Office. But we just remind you first that, of course, we've written an open letter regarding this very brave Met Police whistleblower, a letter to the policing minister, Mr. Lewis, and we'd also written an email to his predecessor, Mike Penning. Those are about 10 days old now, a little bit over, and there's been a total silence from both these two gentlemen and a total silence from their constituencies because we also asked their constituency chairman to help. Well, it gets better because we've now had the first Home Office response to that Met whistleblower and his testimony. And what took place? Well, a phone call in which the Home Office media team said to me, Mr. Gerrish, can you tell us at what point in time in the audio the name of Mr. Penning is mentioned? Well, this was a very interesting question, and we gave them a response. I think you're asking the wrong question. Shouldn't you be asking at what time the policeman talks about the little girl who is dead in the gutter? There was a long pause. We then said, have you actually listened to the tape? To which the Home Office spokesperson said, no, but we wonder if you can tell us at which point Mr. Penning is mentioned. We replied, tell the person who instructed you to ask that question to listen to the tape. But what we learnt from that phone call is firstly that everything is very silent on the child abuse front. And of course, the Home Office is now showing it is more concerned with reputation management for the policing ministers, in particular Mr. Penning, that they want to know exactly where that point is in the tape. They're simply not interested that at other points in the tape, the policeman is talking about serious sexual abuse, prostitution and trafficking of youngsters. And of course, ultimately, the fact these children are at such risk, they are literally dying in the gutter. And to be fair to the Home Office media team, of course, those individuals were given the very difficult job of dealing with us. Meanwhile, the ministers and other civil servants ran scared in the background. But everything's okay. We can trust the British government. It's clearly doing a good job. It's clearly protecting children. Well, north of the border, there's a similar picture. So let's have a look at the situation around the Dohertys. And of course, the Dohertys have had 4 children taken from them. And people have gone to Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister in order to get her help. Well, Nicola Sturgeon, too scared to talk to the public. So she's done much as the Home Office has done, which is put the burden onto the media team. And in particular, she put it on to one particular lady that said this in response to the fact that 4 children were unlawfully taken by armed Irish police. 2 armed in there, apologise for that. But that's not the problem. The line is that Nicola Sturgeon does not get involved in individual cases. Well, she does get involved in the Brain family case because that's widely publicised. So, of course, the line that Nicola Sturgeon does not get involved in individual cases is a lie. And it fell on Eileen Easton, head of Nicola Sturgeon's press office, to lie on the order of her boss, presumably that would be Nicola Sturgeon. So we can say, relax, everything is okay. Where the stealing of children is concerned by the state, the real lie will come out of the media team on the instructions of Nicola Sturgeon's press office. And can we add a bit to this? Well, we can. This is an email that we received this morning, and it's in relation to inquiries made of Police Scotland in relation to the Dohertys. And Police Scotland says, Police Scotland has many obligations in regard to allowing access to information. You can read more about this on our website, including details of applying for information under the Data Protection Act. and Freedom of Information Scotland Act 2002, due to data protection legislation, we will not be answering your question. And until we receive a copy of a valid UK press card for you, we will not be answering any further queries. So everything's okay, but the Scottish police are going to cover up criminal activity, albeit in Ireland, by virtue of the fact they're going to hide behind data protection. This is a very common tactic. And also now they're bringing in the fact that unless you belong to one of the two closed journalist organisations, we're not going to deal with you. We've had this problem before, but usually manage to get around it. But of course, the Police Scotland are saying, well, you don't belong to a press organisation, a bona fide press organisation, so we're not going to respond to you. And if we have a look at this one here, we've got another email, and it says, "Dear Ms. X, thank you for your email. The Scottish Government would always suggest that matters relating to alleged criminal activity are raised with Police Scotland. However, as mentioned in my initial reply, cannot comment or intervene in individual cases." So that's not my reading. There is a small error in that first sentence. Not to worry, everything's okay. I can confirm that where the Scottish Government received correspondence from individuals raising concerns about the topics raised in your initial email, they would be provided with full information about how they can formally contact the relevant bodies to raise their concerns, including the escalation routeways for the resolution of any disputes about the handling of their concerns. I apologise that I can't assist you further. Yours sincerely, Jack Murray, Child Protection Policy, Children and Families Directorate. I'm sorry, I think I mentioned Police Scotland there. I meant Child Protection. So we just add in the line. We've now got everything is, well, it's okay because we can just fob off the public with newspeak over child abuse. And let's turn to Melanie Shaw, because Melanie Shaw is now about 10 weeks incarcerated into HM Prison Foston Hall. For those who don't know, she's the lady who blew the whistle on serious child abuse at Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham. And of course, what we can show you is that Theresa May, former Home Secretary, knew everything that was happening to this very brave lady. To hear what she has really been through is heart-rending. I can't put it in a better way than that, and most of it has not been made public to date. Okay, Theo, if we pop that one back on screen. What is happening to Melanie? Well, apparently in HM Prison Foston Hall, they're now saying they're unable to discuss Melanie. We regard her as a political prisoner, of course. She's segregated. She's having the withholding of male rights. She has been denied medical attention. This is an old tactic that was carried out in Peterborough Prison. But we also now know that HM Prison staff are interfering in the process of her legal defence. Now, I'm not at liberty to give you more detail on that, but I can tell you that that is taking place. But the excuse for no information, data protection. So everything is okay, but it's very silent on the child abuse front. And we had another email in on this very subject where somebody had asked about Melanie's physical condition. This had been sent to the governor of Foston Hall Prison, Mr. Carl Davies. They can't tell the gentleman who requested about this because, of course, that's personal data protection. They're unable to disclose whether Melanie is sharing a cell, where she's not. She's in solitary confinement again for the public safety, apparently. But then at the bottom, it says this. However, on this occasion, I can confirm that there are no restrictions in place on mail. However, in the limited communications that Melanie has been able to get out, she has specifically stated that letters that she has written and handed in to be sent, had then been returned to her a few days later, a particularly cruel little tactic, and that she's been prevented from receiving mail. So my message here is not only the cruel treatment of a child abuse whistleblower, but the fact that we've got yet more government agencies obviously prepared to lie about what is really taking place in order to help keep Melanie away from the public's eyes and out of communication with the public. Why would they want to do that? In order to protect the British government. So everything very silent on the child abuse front. And is it likely to get better? Well, thank you very much to the viewer who sent this in from the Birmingham Mail. And it's a very simple headline that the former Birmingham MP John Hemming has apparently been selected to stand again. Well, this doesn't fill me with much confidence that we're going to see a dynamic change in Mr. Hemming, because at the end of the day, has he got into child abuse in Westminster? Has he really taken other politicians and the Prime Minister to task? And the answer is a resounding no. So I'll leave other people to consider that. But I think we can say that even if Mr. Hemming is re-elected, we can expect silence on the child abuse front. But we would like to say a very big thank you to Alice Through the Looking Glass. And if you haven't visited this site, please do, because some really excellent analysis and investigation of what's been going on around child abuse. And it's by the good work of other organisations and people that we can get things to emerge into the public domain about what's happening with the children. And if you're unsure as to why UK Column will not leave this subject alone, I will repeat again that if you want to understand how the criminal corruption in Westminster works, follow the trail of money and follow the trail of the abuse of children. Follow those two things and we will be able to take the lid off the fact that we have a United Kingdom at the moment run by a criminal cabal in Westminster. Now, something else that we need to keep an eye on is what's happening at very local police level. And this was sent in by somebody yesterday, and it's a very interesting headline from our local paper. It says, Plymouth police officers are asking people to give them lifts to and from jobs. And it goes on to say that police volunteers already drive, they already act as community engagement and protection officers. And these new volunteers are going to be employed on a wide range of other matters. And we wonder what those other matters might be. But of course, using members of the public to work with the police was the favourite tactic of the Stasi in East Germany. And for those of you who listen from Germany, you know, of course, I'm not pointing a finger at the German people. We're talking about a very dangerous political organisation. But it is factually correct that the Stasi were using a wide network of so-called ordinary members of the public in order to spy on their family, friends and neighbours. And the person who sent this to us, of course, gave out that specific warning that something very nasty was being introduced with the police. Armed police and militarised police at the top end of the scale, at the bottom end of the scale, the police being blurred into some form of community policing network. And of course, we can't rely on our police. The Met whistleblower has shown us that at the higher level with Met. But the Express yesterday had this headline, Rotherham scandal, fury over dodgy vanishing of child abuse evidence from police station. And if you read the article, it was saying very clearly that what was happening was that serious evidence from victims of abuse was simply disappearing. And we've contrasted that with the sorry state that nuclear files regarding nuclear weapons in Israel have disappeared from archives. So what can we label that? Everything is not okay. And it's absolutely up to us to deal with it. So can I say, to end what has been probably a pretty serious news on the state of the country, it does require everybody to do something. And it's very noticeable that out of the wonderful UK column supporters that we have, it is a relative few people who are taking the trouble to write to the governor of the prison, to write to the Home Secretary, to write to Scottish Police. So a very few people are taking it upon themselves to do what is necessary. What we need is for everybody to take it on themselves to do what is necessary under the basis of many hands make light work. So we will end on a very positive note for us. We would like to say a very big thank you to all of you who've taken up subscriptions and made a donation to the UK column. We've had some very small donations from people who could only afford that amount, and we value those donations. We've also had some larger donations from people who are saying, I've only just discovered you, but please keep doing what you're doing. So we'd like to end by saying that we know there are many good people out there. Don't get dragged into the hole, as it were, but do take action, because at the end of the day, action conquers fear. Thanks very much for joining us. Everything is okay, provided we make it that way. Bye-bye.